Japan, 1872. The country is in the middle of one of the most dramatic identity crises in human history. Samurai who spent decades training to fight with swords are being handed government bonds and told to figure it out. Western ships are docked in Tokyo Bay. Buddhist monks are trying to break into the imperial palace. And somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, a soldier is dying. Not from a bullet, not from a blade, but from eating too much rice. That last part is not a metaphor. It is, in fact, one of the central nutritional disasters of the modern era, and it is just one of several reasons why surviving on the Meiji-era samurai diet would genuinely wreck you. This is not a story about exotic ingredients or ancient rituals. This is a story about a diet so particular, so culturally loaded, and so medically precarious that it killed warriors by the tens of thousands, while simultaneously producing some of the most elegant food traditions ever recorded. If you want to eat like a samurai, you should probably know what you are actually signing up for. Subscribe to the channel if you want more history served exactly like this: strange, specific, and completely true. Before anything else, you need to understand that rice in feudal and early Meiji Japan was not just food. It was money. A samurai's entire salary, his social rank, his military obligations, how many retainers he could afford, his worth as a human being, was denominated in koku. One koku was approximately 180 kilograms of rice, the amount considered necessary to feed one adult for a full year. A high-ranking samurai might earn a few hundred koku annually. The great lords, the daimyo, commanded domains measured in tens of thousands. The smallest unit that qualified someone for the title of daimyo was 10,000 koku. The largest domain outside the shogun's own was called the million koku domain. Rice was, essentially, the entire economy. What this meant practically is that polished white rice, the expensive, laboriously husked kind, was a status symbol as much as it was a calorie. The wealthy ate white rice. The poor ate brown rice, barley, millet, or sweet potato, depending on how poor they were. By the time the Meiji Restoration rolled around, the 1873 land tax reform, which allowed taxes to be paid in cash instead of rice, had an unintended effect. Farmers who had previously kept barley and mixed grains as dietary staples could now sell their rice and eat it too, which meant polished white rice started spreading to social classes that had no business eating it exclusively. More on why that is catastrophic in a moment. A typical samurai breakfast in the early Meiji era consisted of rice, miso soup, and tsukemono, pickled vegetables. Not complicated, not glamorous. The leftover rice from breakfast would frequently reappear at lunch and dinner with one or two additional dishes added on. Lower-ranking samurai, especially single men, had it even simpler. It was not yet considered socially acceptable for unmarried men to cook for themselves daily, so they relied on a system called makanaiya, food delivery services that brought small lacquered boxes called okamochi to your door. Essentially, ancient Uber Eats, but with more umeboshi and significantly less choice. A salty pickled plum, by the way, was considered a complete side dish. So if you were a low-ranking samurai subsisting on rice, miso soup, and a pickled plum per meal, you were eating exactly the same thing as the farmers your class technically outranked. Comforting. The miso in the soup deserves its own moment, because it was not just an ingredient, it was a social declaration. The samurai class and the elite ate miso made from white rice, which was expensive and difficult to produce. The lower classes made do with barley miso or millet miso. The miso in your bowl advertised your place in society before you took a single sip. The samurai relationship with miso soup goes back to the Kamakura period, roughly the 12th century, when Zen monks returning from China brought mortars and pestles that allowed miso to be ground into a paste and dissolved in hot water. The paste form spread through the warrior class and became the cornerstone of what was called ichiju isai, one soup, one dish, rice. The militarized simplicity of samurai culture demanded that meals not be a distraction, and miso soup fit perfectly, fast, filling, and requiring almost no ceremony. During the Sengoku era, military commanders even developed an ancestor of instant miso soup. Taro stems simmered in miso paste, then dried and worn like a belt. You cut off a piece, added hot water, and you had field rations. The Meiji-era samurai was no longer wearing miso belts to war, but his breakfast had not changed dramatically in centuries. For over 1,200 years, eating meat in Japan was either illegal, religiously condemned, socially catastrophic, or all three simultaneously. The first official ban was issued in 675 AD by Emperor Tenmu, who prohibited the consumption of cattle, horses, dogs, monkeys, and chickens during the farming season. Over the following centuries, the prohibition expanded, solidified, and became embedded in Buddhist doctrine, Shinto notions of ritual purity, and symbol social pressure. Beef was the most forbidden. Certain shrines demanded more than 100 days of fasting as penance for consuming it. If you ate pork or venison and someone found out, a government decree required 60 days of public repentance. The taboo was not subtle. And yet, people ate meat. They just had to get creative about it. Wild boar, technically excluded from Emperor Tenmu's original ban, was the most popular workaround. Shops in Edo sold it openly under the name Yamakujira, which translates to mountain whale. The logic was that whale was considered a fish under Buddhist dietary conventions, and so calling boar mountain whale technically moved it into an acceptable food category. It is the medieval equivalent of calling a hot dog a processed meat log to get around a veganism rule, except the consequences for getting caught included religious condemnation and public disgrace. Venison was sold under the code name momiji, meaning maple leaf, because of the reddish color of the meat. Wild boar was also sometimes sold as botan, meaning peony flower. By the 18th century, Edo had a flourishing underground meat economy operating entirely in flower and nature metaphors. The Hikone clan took a different approach. Their annual tribute gift to the shogun, beef pickled in sake, which was apparently excellent, was sent in packages labeled as medicine. This was not a regulatory loophole so much as a shared fiction that everyone involved politely maintained. Buddhist monks could eat meat if a doctor prescribed it. The aristocracy occasionally consumed it as a special health food. The entire system was a sophisticated arrangement of mutually agreed-upon denial that persisted for over a millennium and collapsed within a single decade once the Meiji government decided it was no longer useful. On January 24, 1872, the Japanese government announced that Emperor Meiji had begun eating beef and mutton regularly. This was not a casual dietary update, it was a calculated political detonation. The emperor, who was, under Shinto doctrine, a living god descended from the sun goddess, had just publicly violated a taboo that had been in place for 1,197 years. The message was explicit. Japan was modernizing, meat eating was civilization, and anyone clinging to the old dietary customs was, in the words of a 1872 prefectural government decree, acting contrary to the wishes of the emperor. The response from the religious establishment was immediate. On February 18, 1872, less than a month later, a group of Buddhist monks broke into the imperial palace to demand an audience with the emperor. In the fight with the guards, half of them were killed. Their position was that the new trend of eating meat was destroying the soul of the Japanese people. Their protest was unsuccessful. Within 5 years, the number of beef specialty restaurants in Tokyo went from 70 to 588. The gyunabe, beef hot pot cooked in miso sauce and spring onions, became such a symbol of cultural progress that a popular novelist wrote that you were an uncultured yokel if you had not tried it. For the samurai class, men who had spent centuries maintaining elaborate food taboos as part of their warrior identity, the speed of this shift was genuinely disorienting. One historical record describes a samurai at a Western-style dinner mistaking a table napkin for furoshiki, a wrapping cloth, and carefully bundling his leftovers in it to take home. The learning curve was steep. Not all samurai food restrictions came from Buddhism. Some came from something considerably more specific, not wanting to die in an embarrassing way. The fugu, a pufferfish containing tetrodotoxin, one of the most potent natural poisons known, was avoided entirely by samurai, not because it was forbidden by law or religion, but because dying from fugu poisoning would be shameful. A samurai's death was supposed to happen in battle or in controlled, honorable circumstances. Dying because a chef failed to properly remove a fish's liver was a humiliating way to end a warrior's legacy. Certain types of tuna created a different problem. Tuna was known in older Japanese as shibi, which is a homophone for the day of death. Eating something that sounded like a death announcement was considered bad luck for anyone whose profession involved not dying. The fish kohada, spotted sardine, was called konoshiro in classical Japanese, and eating konoshiro sounded phonetically similar to eating this castle. For a samurai sworn to protect his lord's domain, eating something that sounded like destroying the thing you were supposed to defend was unacceptable. These were not isolated superstitions. They were part of a culture in which language, food, and consequence were understood to be intertwined, where the name of what you ate carried as much weight as the eating itself. And they persisted, largely unchanged, into the Meiji era among former samurai families who maintained traditional customs even as the world around them rewrote everything else. Here is where the samurai diet stops being charming and becomes genuinely lethal. Between 1878 and 1883, beriberi, a disease caused by thiamine or vitamin B1 deficiency, was responsible for roughly 1/3 of all disease and injury cases in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Sailors fell ill an average of 4 times a year from it. In 1882, 169 men out of 376 on a single training mission from Japan to Hawaii developed the disease. 25 died. The cause was white rice, specifically the complete absence of almost everything else. Polished white rice was the Meiji-era status symbol that had been slowly spreading down the social hierarchy since the Edo period. Removing the outer layers of a rice grain also removes its thiamine content. Eat enough of it without compensating through other foods, and your peripheral nervous system starts failing. Your legs go numb, your muscles weaken, your heart enlarges, and eventually, you die. The disease was known in Japanese as kakke and had been killing people in major cities since the 17th century, particularly in Edo, where it was sometimes called Edo disease because people from the provinces who moved to the city and switched to white rice would get sick, and those who went back home to their barley and millet diets would mysteriously recover. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had made the problem dramatically worse by using white rice as a recruiting tool. Unlimited polished white rice was offered to new conscripts as an incentive, because many of these men came from rural families who had spent their lives eating barley and millet. White rice was aspirational. It was what rich people ate. The military was essentially saying, "Join us and eat like an aristocrat." Many soldiers took them up on it, ate almost nothing but rice, and began dying of a deficiency disease at rates that would soon exceed battlefield casualties. The man who figured out what was happening was Takaki Kanehiro, a naval physician from a poor samurai family in Satsuma who had studied medicine in London at St. Thomas's Hospital. When Takaki returned to Japan and took up the role of director of the Tokyo Naval Hospital in the early 1880s, he noticed something that should have been obvious to everyone. Officers, who ate varied diets with meat and vegetables, almost never got beriberi. Ordinary sailors, who ate almost exclusively the free white rice the Navy provided because they could not afford anything else, got it constantly. He surveyed the data, identified the pattern, and concluded that the problem was dietary, specifically a deficiency of protein relative to carbohydrates, which was not quite the right explanation but was directionally correct enough to save thousands of lives. In 1883, Takaki petitioned Emperor Meiji directly to fund a dietary experiment with the naval fleet. He is reported to have told the emperor that if the cause of beriberi were discovered by a foreign scientist before a Japanese one found it, it would be a national disgrace. The emperor funded the experiment. In 1884, a training ship took the same route that had produced 169 beriberi cases the previous year, but this time with an improved diet that included barley, meat, milk, bread, and vegetables. Out of 333 sailors, only 16 cases were reported. Beriberi was eliminated from the Imperial Japanese Navy within 2 years. Takaki was eventually ennobled with the title of Baron and was affectionately nicknamed Barley Baron by his contemporaries. It is a good nickname. He earned it. The Imperial Japanese Army, meanwhile, looked at all of this evidence and decided it did not believe any of it. The Army's medical establishment, led by figures trained in German academic medicine at Tokyo Imperial University, was committed to the theory that beriberi was an infectious disease caused by bacteria. The idea that the solution was simply adding barley to rice rations struck them as embarrassingly low-tech. the kind of folk remedy that a modern scientific military should be above. An army surgeon named Mori Rintaro, who had studied military nutrition in Germany, delivered a speech arguing that a non-Japanese diet would make a general lose his high ground. The army published articles under pseudonyms dismissing Takaki's findings. Unit-level medical officers who had quietly added barley to their men's food and watched the beriberi disappear were implementing the fix anyway, but the official position remained that the disease was microbial, the solution was sanitation, and the barley people were wrong. Then came the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 1905, and the army ran out of ways to argue. During that conflict, over 200,000 Japanese soldiers suffered from beriberi. 27,000 of them died from it, compared to 47,000 deaths from actual combat. The disease killed more than half as many soldiers as the enemy did, and every single death was preventable with barley. The army finally added barley to battlefield rations as the war dragged on and the numbers became impossible to ignore. Mori Rintaro, incidentally, was also one of Japan's most celebrated Meiji-era novelists, writing under the pen name Mori Ogai. He is considered a giant of modern Japanese literature. He was also completely wrong about beriberi, and his institutional stubbornness contributed to tens of thousands of deaths. History contains multitudes. The beriberi crisis produced one more consequence that nobody planned for, and that has outlasted every military policy from that era: curry rice. When naval physician Takaki redesigned the fleet's diet to combat beriberi, Navy officials studied what other navies were eating, particularly the British Royal Navy, which had no beriberi problem. The British ships were serving a thick, flour-thickened beef stew seasoned with curry powder, adapted from Anglo-Indian colonial cuisine. It contained meat and flour, both of which are thiamine sources. It was easy to make in enormous quantities. It had no regional associations within Japan, which meant a ship's crew drawn from Kyushu, Tohoku, and everywhere in between would eat it without complaint. And it was filling in a way that addressed the caloric demands of sailors on long voyages. The Imperial Japanese Navy adopted it, thickened it further with a French-style roux, added potatoes and carrots, dialed back the spice, and served it over rice. The first Japanese recipe for curry, called raisukare, had been published in 1872, the same year the meat ban was officially lifted. But it was the Navy's adoption of the dish as a weekly staple that turned it from a foreign curiosity served in expensive Yokohama restaurants into a national institution. By the early 20th century, curry rice was standard naval mess. Former sailors brought the recipe home. By the 1950s, prepackaged curry roux blocks were available in every household in Japan. Today, surveys consistently rank Japanese curry as the country's most beloved home-cooked meal, ahead of ramen, ahead of sushi. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force still serves curry every Friday, a tradition maintained to help sailors keep track of the days of the week. The dish that saved the Meiji Navy from a vitamin deficiency is now comfort food for an entire nation, and it got there because white rice was killing people. The samurai class itself, meanwhile, was dealing with a different kind of nutritional crisis, not a biological one, but an economic one. In 1876, the Meiji government enacted what was called the Chitsuroku Shobun, permanently suspending all government stipends to samurai and converting them into one-time payments in interest-bearing government bonds. The rice-based salary system that had defined samurai identity and social standing for centuries was gone. The men who had measured their worth in koku, in the weight of the grain that fed the nation, now had government paper and the instruction to become something else. Many did not know how to cook. Many had relied on the makanaya delivery system for their daily meals. Some grew vegetables in the small gardens attached to their modest houses and lived almost self-sufficiently. Others found work as teachers, bureaucrats, or police officers in the new Meiji state. A small number, most famously Saigo Takamori and his followers in Satsuma, rebelled, and were defeated by a conscript army that included the farmers and commoners the samurai class had technically outranked for generations. What is left of the samurai diet today is, in a way, everything. The Ichiju Sansai format, rice, miso soup, pickled vegetables, one or two side dishes, is still the structural template for a traditional Japanese meal. The miso soup that a Kamakura-era warrior drank before battle is recognizably the same soup served at Japanese breakfast tables in 2025, made from the same basic ingredients in the same basic proportions. Umeboshi, the salty, pickled plum that lower-ranking samurai ate as their entire side dish, is now placed at the center of onigiri sold in convenience stores across the country. Tsukemono, the pickled vegetables that appeared at every meal regardless of rank, are still a standard component of any serious Japanese meal. The food taboos that sent samurai to elaborate linguistic lengths to avoid eating the wrong fish have dissolved, but the culinary logic they protected, the emphasis on seasonal ingredients, precise preparation, and the refusal to let a meal be careless survived the taboos that enforced it. And the white rice problem, in its own way, is also still here. Japan's modern diet has shifted dramatically since the Meiji era, and beri-beri is no longer a national crisis. But the centrality of white rice to Japanese culinary identity, the thing that made it worth dying for as a status symbol, worth lying about as a military ration, worth defending against a British naval physician's barley experiment, has never really gone away. It is just no longer killing anyone. Progress. So here is the question. If you had to eat like a Meiji-era samurai for a week, rice, miso soup, pickled plum, maybe some dried fish, which part would break you first? The portion sizes? The repetition? The absence of meat? Or the dawning realization that your breakfast, lunch, and dinner are structurally identical? Leave it in the comments. And if you made it this far without going to check your fridge, subscribe. There is a lot more history like this waiting for you.